If the obvious test does not make your decision clear, the second test you can apply to any decision in your life is the wisdom test. James 1:5 tells us, if any of us lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. And the way you get wisdom over a decision is you ask some strategic questions about it. And if you get the same answer to every one of these questions, that decision has now become obvious. The first question in the wisdom test is, does this decision line up with my convictions? Does it hold true to what I know to be right in life? Second question, will the people I respect most agree with this decision, and have I asked them? Make sure you don't assume what they're going to say. Make sure you actually ask those people and see what answers they give. Next, is this decision based on healthy boundaries that will produce self-respect? Because every decision that you make in life should give you a sense of self-respect and allow you to do what you know is right in life. Next, will this decision cause personal growth in my life? Will I become a better person because I made this decision? Will this improve my most important relationships? I mean, you know as well as I do, the relationships of your life determine the quality of your life. So if this decision is going to improve those relationships, it's a good thing. Would I encourage my best friends to make this decision? See, now if you go through these questions and you say yes, 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 it's pretty obvious you ought to move forward with that decision. In the same way, if you come up with no, 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 it likewise is clear that that's become a pretty obvious decision. The struggle comes is when some of them are yes, some of them are no. That's when you need to have a little bit more of an intense process to go through to determine what you ought to do with this decision. So before we move to that next test, think about this question. What is the difference between being smart and being wise? So if the obvious test and the wisdom test do not make your decision clear, there is a third test you can apply to any decision you're faced with, which is called the priority test. It's based on Psalm 90, verse 12. Teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And so when you're faced with a decision, again, it isn't really obvious what you should do. There are a number of steps you can take to bring clarity to that decision. The first step is to write out your decision in a positive way. We all have a tendency to state what's happening negatively. Like, should I turn that job down? Should I refuse to move to that new community? Instead, you want to write it down positively. Should I accept that new position? Should I move to that new community and see what opportunities are there? Once you have your decision written down in a positive way, then make a pro and con list. Take a sheet of paper, divide it into 2 columns. On one side, write down all the reasons why I should say yes to this decision. On the other side, write down all the reasons why I should say no to this decision. And take your time with this list. Like, you want to write down every reason you can think of, and you might even want to ask some friends to give their input so that you have 2 full lists to work with. Once you have those lists made, then prioritize the reasons. Go through all the reasons why you should say yes to this and prioritize them. Now, the way I like to do it is with A's, B's, and C's. An A reason is a vital reason. It is important to the discussion, and it holds a lot of weight on why I should say yes or no to this decision. B reasons, those are supporting reasons. They aren't strong enough to stand alone, but they would support any A reason you have on your list. And the C reasons, those are things you came up with because you're creative. They don't really apply to the decision. They aren't going to sway the decision one way or another. But because you're creative, you can come up with things. And so go through all the reasons to say yes and prioritize them, A, B, and C. Then go through all the reasons to say no and prioritize them, A, B, and C. And then the fourth step is compare the high priority reasons from both lists. See, the mistake I see most people make is they look at this list of pros and cons and they think the one with the most reasons must be the one I need to move with. But there are times when one reason on one side of this list is going to be so strong that it trumps every other reason on the list. And I had an experience just like that in my life. We were living in Central California, and I had this sense that God wanted me to move from being a youth pastor to pastoring a church. And so we started looking for churches to commit to, and we got connected with this church down in San Diego County. And we went and visited them and started the candidating process, and it wasn't real clear to us whether we should say yes or no, and so we went through this process. We wrote out the decision in a positive way. Should we move to San Diego and take on leadership responsibility for this church? And then we started writing down the reasons. Well, the reasons for saying no to this church included things like the building was poorly designed. Now, I was an architecture major in college, and I had worked as an architectural draftsman for a number of years before I went into the ministry. So this was an important issue to me. And when I say that the building was designed poorly, I mean this building had been added onto twice, and you could tell exactly where. There was a beam that ran down 2/3 of the way over and 3/4 of the way back. There was a beam that hung down under the ceiling. So you could tell this church had been added to the side, and it had been added on to the back. In addition, the ceiling was really low. And when I say low, I mean when I was standing on the platform, if I got excited and put my hand up in the air, I would hit the ceiling. And then the door from the auditorium to the office was right in the middle of the stage. And I don't mean centered on the stage and at stage height. I mean in the middle of the stage. On Sunday, the stage would actually hit the middle of the door so you couldn't use it on Sunday morning. And I asked the people, I said, well, why is that door right there in the middle of the stage? And they said, oh, well, that's the door to our offices. And every Sunday night, we remove this part of the stage so that we can use it during the week to get back to the offices. And again, having some architectural experience, I knew there were lots of places to put this door rather than right in the middle of the stage. Well, the list of reasons for saying no continued. The church didn't seem especially relevant to San Diego County. It was loaded with good people, but culturally they were a little bit behind what was happening in San Diego. And the leadership of the church was underdeveloped. Very sincere people, godly people, but they hadn't committed themselves to learning leadership skills. They hadn't really studied the whole process of leadership, and so they were playing catch up in terms of leadership. And then Pam and I would take a pay cut to move there, which would make it more difficult to own a home in that community because homes were expensive and we were making less money. And then I noticed that the congregation was relatively uneducated, which there's certainly nothing wrong with not having a college degree. It's just that we lived in an area where education was very important. And I had finished my master's degree and Pam had finished her bachelor's degree. And so it was a little bit of a challenge to communicate at times just because of the educational difference. And then the church was 25 years old, and it had never grown larger than 200 attendees. Now, nothing wrong with 200 attendees, and that's a healthy number for a lot of churches. The struggle is just, it was in a place where the potential was a lot larger. They had a lot of drama talent and a lot of music talent, and so they had all this potential that they could have been larger, but they'd never figured out how to get over that plateau. So those were the reasons for saying no to this opportunity. There were just a few reasons for saying yes to this opportunity. First of all, San Diego County is a very nice place to live. You know, I've done a lot of traveling around this country, and people in San Diego are spoiled when it comes to weather, and so it was just a nice place to live. The church had a lot of potential, as I explained earlier. Boy, they were in this hotbed of growth, population-wise, and there were a lot of people to draw from and a lot of talent in this church to work with. So there was a lot of potential. And I had a strong sense that God was calling us to this church and to this community. And people ask me, what do you mean strong sense of calling? Well, there were a number of things that lined up. Most importantly, we had set a deadline. We had said, God, if we don't connect with a church by this date, then I'm going to change gears and start looking for a staff position rather than looking to be a senior pastor. And this church came in right into that deadline. And then when we went and ministered to this church during the candidating process, boy, the response from the congregation, it was bigger than could be explained by just Pam's and my abilities. But it was obvious that there was something in this relationship that God was honoring, and God was moving in their lives, and God was moving in our lives. And then both Pam and I had this strong sense of peace that despite all the difficulties and despite the things that we didn't like about the building and some of the challenges there, we both had this peace in our heart that this is where God wanted us to be. So I have to tell you, this one reason right here was so important, it actually overshadowed everything else. As we looked at our list of all the reasons to say yes to this opportunity and all the reasons to say no to this opportunity, this ended up being the only A reason. Everything else that we had come up with was on the B side. And we began to realize, this one right here, it's overshadowed everything. And so we ended up saying yes to that opportunity at that church in San Diego County. And I was a pastor there for 15 years. We ended up having a great run of ministry there. This whole ministry that we're doing today, it got launched at that church. And we saw a number of entrepreneurial ministries rise up in the midst of that 15 years that are still influencing the world today. And so when you're working through this pro and con list, it's very important that you prioritize the reasons on both sides, because it's always possible that there's one reason that is so important, it trumps everything else. For most of the decisions that you're faced with, these first 3 tests are going to lead you to a decision you can have confidence in. By the time you've worked through the obvious test, the wisdom test, and the priority test, you're going to have a pretty clear grasp of where you need to go. But every once in a while, you're going to face a decision that is truly new. That your life experience up to this point has not exposed you to this kind of a decision before, and so you don't even really know where to start. And the reason why that happens is all of us have a limited focus in life. And sometimes you have decisions in your life that fall outside of that focus. And so you need a way of broadening your horizons and broadening your perspective. And the way you do that is with the brainstorm test. And what the brainstorm test is you just make a brainstorm list of all the possible solutions to whatever decision is in front of you. And you want to, at this point, not eliminate anything. You want to include the ridiculous things. You want to include things you know you would never do, because you're trying to get your perspective to widen out. And so take your time on this. Write down every possible solution you can think of. Ask your friends and trusted mentors of any possible solutions they know of, and just get them all on paper. And once you have that list down, just take a break. Come back a little bit later and go through the list. Eliminate all the ridiculous reasons, because you're going to have some things on there that are just silly. And then eliminate all the things you know you would never actually do in your life. Now be careful with that one, because there may be solutions on your paper that are uncomfortable for you but might be very good for you to do. I'm talking about those things you know that based on who you are, you just would never be very good at those. For instance, I know that I could sell things for a short period of time, but I'm not really a salesman. So if I worked in a sales position for too long, I would lose interest. So I can come up with solutions that include pretty aggressive selling, but I know it's not a good long-term pursuit for me. And then once you have narrowed down this lead, you've gotten rid of all the ridiculous things, you've gotten rid of things that you know you would never actually do, then pick out the top 2 or 3 ideas that are left and take them through the priority test. And again, you can tell it's a lot of work. It's a very rigorous process to use the brainstorm test, so you want to reserve it for just some very major decisions in your life that are new. But by the time you have brainstormed this list, narrowed the list down, and then worked those decisions through the priority test, you'll have a decision that you can have confidence in and move you forward. So now, take a few moments and just write down on your sheet of paper a decision that's coming up for you that requires a little bit of extra work. Maybe it's not real clear to you yet, but you need some time to work through either the priority test or the brainstorm test. Identify what that decision is now, and then set aside time this week to start working on it. And as you take this journey in decision making, may God do through you what is beyond you.